Hello, welcome. Today we'll be talking a little bit about teaching vocabulary in our series EntreCulturas. Our objectives for our short time together are for you to be able to explain what teaching vocabulary in context is and why it's beneficial, identify the vocabulary sections in EntreCulturas, and use resources that are part of EntreCulturas to teach vocabulary in context. Teaching vocabulary is a necessary ingredient for all communication. Language learners must be able to acquire it and retain it in order to communicate. Learning vocabulary is a cumulative process. It must be taught, learned, recycled. So what do we know about teaching vocabulary? Let's look at 3 things that are critical for learners to acquire vocabulary. First, in order for learners to acquire and retain vocabulary, they need to encounter the words in a variety of rich contexts, often requiring up to 16 different encounters. But what does in context mean? According to Schrum and Glisson in the Teacher's Handbook, Contextualized Language Instruction, context is the set of circumstances in which tasks are performed. Let's look at an example. Let's say the content that you want to teach, the vocabulary in this instance, is related to school supplies. Instead of giving students a vocabulary list with the pictures and words in Spanish in no particular order or for any particular reason, you could present the vocabulary in context by introducing the vocabulary of school supplies in a back-to-school ad from Costa Rica. Shopping for school supplies provides the circumstance for students to use the language in real-world tasks. It is the context. Let's think about another example. Let's say our content is vocabulary or related to clothing. What are some contexts that learners could participate in to acquire those words? Well, it could be shopping, it could be packing for a vacation to a particular climate, or maybe it could be comparing fashion and discussing fashion in the learners community to that of teens in a Spanish-speaking country. Whichever context you choose, learners need a variety of encounters with the vocabulary in order to acquire and retain them. Number 2, learners remember words when they have manipulated them or used them in a variety of ways. In other words, it's not just a variety of contexts that's important, but different ways of using those words within that variety of context. In other words, they need to use the words in different modes of communication. For example, interpersonal speaking and interpersonal writing, interpretive listening and reading, presentational writing and speaking, as well as tasks that are both receptive and productive in nature. Those that focus on input and interpreting the input, and those that have students produce output of language. Third, learners forget words very quickly. Some say within the first 24 hours after introduction. So either way, it is important for learners to continue to use vocabulary with tasks that reinforce and recycle those words over and over again. They should manipulate those words for that practice using a variety of contexts and in a variety of different ways. So we're going to take a closer look at what this looks like in a unit from EntreCulturas. And we're going to look at some of the activities that go along with the vocabulary in this particular section. In EntreCulturas, the vocabulary is presented in sections called Así se dice. In EntreCulturas 1, there are 3 Así se dice sections per unit. In EntreCulturas 2 y 3, there are 6 to 10 Así se dice sections per unit. The length and frequency of these Así se dice sections really depends on the context and the vocabulary, the content that students will be learning them in. This is an example from EntreCulturas 1, Unidad 2, Así se dice 1. So Spanish 1, Unit 2, Así se dice vocab section 1. So you're going to notice that the vocabulary is presented in context of a back-to-school ad from Costa Rica. It is presented in a small chunk so that students can acquire the language as opposed to memorize it. In the opening pages of the Así se dice section, Students and teachers interact in the target language to make meaning and use the words in a variety of contexts. You will also find help in the instructional strategies section of the teacher's edition of the textbook on how to present vocabulary in context if you would like. So students are going to be exposed to either written or oral input of vocabulary, and then the students and teachers are going to interact with those again through maybe a combination of total participation techniques, comprehensible input strategies, interactive discussions, in a variety of ways so that students really do understand what the meaning of those words are. The activities that follow are going to, the presentation of vocabulary are going to be scaffolded and are typically going to move from the receptive mode to the productive mode, moving from input to output. So let's look at some of those in this next section.
Lo que normalmente llevo al colegio es en mi mochila son los libros, cuadernos y estuches, son los lápices y bolígrafos y un libro para leer.
So after the students were presented, this was the first example that they were going to have. So again, they're first presented in Actividad 3. You'll see that they were presented with that native speaker talking about some school supplies that she has in her backpack. And the first activity, Actividad 3, is going to be a receptive activity where the students hear that and they're just going to look back at their vocabulary section and they're going to circle what they hear. They're still just learning the vocabulary at this point. In Actividad 4, students do a simple presentational writing activity where they personalize the content by listing items that they have in their backpack. In Actividad 4 Paso 2, students take the list that they made in Paso 1 and talk with a classmate for an interpersonal speaking activity. And in Actividad 6, they produce their own list of supplies needed for their personal classes. In addition to the Así se dice section, that primary vocabulary section, you will also find supplemental vocabulary in the Además se dice section. These are words that students can use to further personalize the vocabulary or perhaps to challenge themselves. The vocabulary in the Además se dice section is not considered essential for the students to know and understand in order to show that they know the unit objectives. For example, let's look at Unidad 5. In order to complete the activity as it's listed, students can simply say the name of the item that costs more. So they can look back at that ad on page 90 and they can just say los lápices or la computadora. However, you could easily differentiate this activity to challenge some students who are ready. You could have them say how much each item costs using the information in the Además se dice section, and then say which costs more. For example, los lápices cuestan 2,000. Los bolígrafos cuestan 1,000. Los lápices cuestan más. In Actividad 7, learners continue to deepen their understanding and retention of the vocabulary in a small group speaking activity. And then, of course, knowing about cultural products, practices, and perspectives lays a foundation for intercultural reflections. So you will also find sections called Enfoque Cultural that ask students to reflect on various aspects of the vocabulary within a cultural context. Students also have a variety of resources available to them to extend their practice and their learning so that they don't forget beyond the classroom. These extension activities range from simple activities to practice individual vocabulary words to more open-ended activities that use the acquired vocabulary in a variety of contexts in the different modes of communication. Through repeated exposure to a variety of vocabulary in contexts across the EntreCulturas series, Students will make connections and advance their communicative and intercultural proficiency in Spanish. I hope you've enjoyed this short video about how to teach vocabulary in context and why teaching it in context is important while using EntreCulturas. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@waysidepublishing.com, and we'll provide the extra support that you need. Thank you.